Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. We're so glad you're here to join us today. We have a fascinating guest. She has an incredible background and some gifts. Uh, Lin Green, an award winning community advocate, columnist, author, speaker, business and nonprofit consultant. Lynn, I don't know when you have time to sleep. Uh, Lynn helps individuals, organizations, and communities turn adversity into growth by breaking generational cycles. And we're going to get into that. We got to talk about your book, Strengthening People's Mindset, Leading with Faith, Intention, and Value-Driven Strategies. Her work bridges personal healing with sustainable impact, and she encourages people to live, lead, and build their lives with purpose. Lynn, welcome to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It is definitely an honor.
Well, thank you. So we got a little bit in common in that we're both immigrants, and talking with you offline and knowing a little bit about your book. Let's lay a little bit of a foundation here because it'll make everything much more fun and digestible, I guess. A little bit about your background, personal and professional.
Yeah, so I was born in Puerto Rico to my mother and father. My mother has always been very independent, very driven. And at the time that we were living in Puerto Rico, she was actually managing a few beauty salons. She was not a U.S. citizen at the time. She still had her resident alien status. She would travel often for beauty shows, very driven, always has been. And the conflict of relationship between her and my father led to some domestic incidents and situations that ultimately made her want to secretly pack up her things and leave. That was what initiated our travels here to the United States. So we ended up going to Dominican Republic, brief pit stop at our grandparents while my mother figured things out, and we ultimately landed in Providence, Rhode Island, the smallest state in the United States of America, out of all places to be. That is where I developed my love for reading and writing, and all things people. I learned to speak English here in the United States. I didn't know any English until I got here, but I got here fairly early. I was about 4 years old, started kindergarten. Sesame Street was a staple for us at the time. I learned a lot of words prior to actually starting elementary school, which was awesome. And then fast forward around the time that I was actually able to watch Oprah is when I realized that I had a desire to know more about human behavior. For some reason, I was drawn to this as a kid. And that pretty much catapulted me into just wanting to live a life of service, to be a public servant. It's crazy because in middle school, I wrote that in my goals planner that I wanted to help at-risk youth. So crazy fast forward into my profession after I got my criminal justice degree. That is exactly what I ended up doing, working with the Department of Juvenile Justice as a case manager at a group treatment home. And then from there, ended up working with a local law enforcement agency where I started as a juvenile probation officer. And now I'm working in the victim services arena. So that plus, expanding into consulting as a result of all the work in public service for nonprofit organizations and businesses. And then the book was kind of a passion project that was born out of that healing work through the years. So
Okay, tell us the name of the book. I love it.
yes, the book is called Enough with the Secrets, Mama. It's an immigrant woman's story of overcoming failure, equipping women with the skills needed to live a life free of maternal heartache. So it centers on mother-daughter relationship issues, which I was experiencing in a big chunk of my life as I was trying to accomplish all these things.
So one thing, how did you get from Providence, Rhode Island? Because you live in Florida now, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So we bounced around all East Coast. And it's interesting when I tell people of the trajectory of our lives and how we went from Providence, Rhode Island to Miami, Florida, to Paterson, New Jersey, to then back down to Florida, where we ultimately settled. We weren't a military family because that's always what I'm asked at
Yeah.
first. It was just transition that we were going through at the time, my mother trying to find the best place for us to settle.
Awesome. Awesome. So, juvenile probation, coming out of law enforcement and myself is probably one of the most frustrating positions to have within the police department was actually working the juvenile victim cases. Now, I didn't work them. When I was the commander of investigations, I had folks, and I personally, it's just like I would desperately want to choke the living what out of somebody that abused a child or victimized a child, but my folks had such patience and gifts for being in that investigative position. How did that work for you as far as impacting like where you're at today and the burnout or the frustration? I mean, did you ever suffer through that kind of phase?
Yeah, so I would say if I'm speaking on behalf of what I saw and experienced with the Department of Juvenile Justice, I got to see the behind the scenes of where these juvenile delinquents, as they call them, ended up when they're sending them away to be rehabilitated. It was me on the other end, plus some other, administrative staff, whose our goal was to, create some restorative justice in this place for these kids. Fast forward to me as a juvenile probation officer, I was the one actually doing the work to get them to abide by the sanctions that the judges would give them. Or if they didn't abide by those sanctions, then I'm now recommending for them to be sent to a place like where I was the case manager. So it was my role to determine, based on comprehensive evaluations. Of course, there's always a real look into the family background, the medical background, mental health backgrounds of the juveniles, where they came from, ultimately, the core of how they got to this place. And is there anything we can do on the outside to help them? And if that doesn't work, do we need to send them somewhere where it's more isolated in a way where they don't have these outside sources and temptations to help them get on the right track? So there was a lot of spinning the wheel in that process. And for sure, it created some burnout because there's only but so much you can do when you don't have any control other than to say, I've developed this plan and let's work on getting you to stick to it when they leave your office and they've got life to go back home to. They've got an environment that they're living in, things they can't control, which ultimately lead, to violations and not following sanctions and things like that. So it kind of became like a hamster in the wheel, after a while.
Yeah. And, and those generational cycles that, I don't know how to say this. The life that they were living, that's their baseline. That's what they know to be normal, whether it's abuse in the family or stealing or selling drugs or, a survival kind of stuff. So how do you effectively, or even for yourself, because I know your book, some of it is hilarious, some of it's not so hilarious. How did you break the generational chains, if you will? I mean, in your own personal life, how did you do that, and then how are you applying those same principles or concepts in your work with victim advocacy and even the consulting in the nonprofit world? Because there's so many generational cycles, even in nonprofit. It's
Yeah.
a friend of mine has a nonprofit, and he goes, the hardest thing about having a nonprofit is raising money. It's not doing the work, kind of deal. So, what were some of the tools that you discovered, either intentionally or by circumstances, to break that generational mindset of and I'm Irish, man. You talk about having dominant,
Yeah.
in dominant, it was like the worst thing you could do is piss off your mom, because then everybody pays, kind of deal.
Yeah.
So
Well,
what'd you do?
which I learned a little bit more about the Irish culture and traditions. It was called How the Irish Saved Civilization.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah.
And I was just so intrigued by this that I have a well-rounded view of the Irish at this point after reading that book, and so much respect. But yeah, so for me, I'll tell you, everyone who does this work, who works in public service to some extent, whether you're a teacher, whether you work in social service, you always end up in this field because you can relate to some extent to what these families are dealing with, what these children are dealing with. And so it was my desire to work in this space was based out of that, out of the fact that I had some things that I experienced in my childhood that were traumatic, things that I had to work through, and oftentimes just avoided into well past adolescence because I didn't understand certain things. And so for me, my faith was the number one foundation, like the root of trying to understand. First and foremost, just the emotions that I was having, the outside world around me that was starting to affect how I saw myself personally, and obviously emotionally too. Identity became a big question for me in terms of where do I belong? What am I doing? What is my purpose? And that for me was what drove me to explore that a little bit more. I'd say that was what ended up opening up this, Pandora's box of sorts of how did we get here? And that made me explore how my mother became who she is. And so the book was really just me doing that exploration in my healing, saying to myself, okay, in the very same way that I've dealt with these families and within the community and the people that I have worked with, there is a root cause to this. And it didn't just start at your mother. It started before that. And I got to really delve deeper into that in my own personal healing, and in turn started to forgive her for the things that she did and said, or the ways that I was putting expectations upon her that she couldn't meet. And so that self-perceived neglect that I felt all throughout my childhood, which led me to become this overachiever, which explains why you say it's hard to imagine how I can accomplish anything. But it was that was the root cause of that, just feeling like I constantly needed to reach the next level. And in some cases in doing that, growing up, it was to make my mother proud because I felt like love was conditional. Until I reached the place where I realized it really didn't matter how much I did. At the end of the day, she is who she is, and I have to be okay with that. So my work in the community is helping people navigate through those things too.
And through all this, because we hear so many self-help gurus and different people on the circuit and whatnot, the big word of the day, it seems, is resiliency. That you just need to learn to be more resilient, or they'll throw out the word grit, or one of the other ones, which I'm learning more and more to understand, is the concept of mindfulness. But what are some of the myths, if you will, that you've discovered in your journey about when people say, oh, you just got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you have to be more resilient? What are some of the myths that you discovered that are helping you help other people now?
Yeah. First of all, that not everyone is capable. That what we think is easy for us to accomplish really is difficult for some people to even fathom. Just the thought of saying no, to something is major, and I've struggled with that, with wanting to be involved and do things. So I get that aspect of it. But even beyond that, I've learned that a lot of times, especially as we're looking to serve others, we want to say, okay, look, I've been through this. I've got this all mapped out. I know exactly what you need to do. And they'll lay it out for them and print it out on a piece of paper and say, this is what you need to do. And you won't have these problems ever again. Not knowing that a lot of people just aren't capable. They emotionally don't know how to get to that place. And so I believe that in treating people that way, what you're doing is alienating them and making them feel worse, because now they're definitely, there's something wrong with me. If she could accomplish this, then why can't I? It really makes it difficult to help others through that healing process when we're not seeing them at where they are. We have to meet them where they are ultimately. And just be willing to sometimes listen. And I think sometimes we're a culture of people, and especially in organizations where we feel like we have this hat on and we have these stripes and we have this position, and we know it all, but we forget sometimes our behaviors and the way we carry on through life don't necessarily match the experiences of others.
Yeah, yeah. I sit on a advisory committee for a nonprofit, and they're in all the research that they've done, and historically looking at the realities of how kids are raised and whatnot, is that social emotional learning amongst children is so deficient. And it was probably deficient in a way in my generation, the baby boomers. We grew up at a time where it's children are to be seen and not heard. I
Yeah.
mean, that was the motto, that was especially when you were out in public. And so your social emotional growth is stunted when you're told to. You're not told to, shut up and sit down, not in those literal terms, but the message is, the expectations are, you're to be seen and not heard, that do it because I said so. And then we complicate all that at the same time that we're suppressing the social and emotional learning skills. We're also being told, if you want it done right, do it yourself. And so, that we get that confusion. And I think particularly in the last 25 years, just all the chaos in the world, take it from 9/11 to current day, and COVID and all those influences that we have a generation of children that are now young adults or adults, that are lacking, not because they refuse to grow and learn and and integrate into society and do all those things, that have visions, have goals, have aspirations, is they just didn't grow up in an environment that supported that for whatever
No.
the reasons were. So tell us a little bit about something you talked about in the healing process for you personally, the whole concept of how did forgiveness play in that, and and how did you express forgiveness or ask for forgiveness, or just the whole concept of, because I think that's one of the biggest obstacles to people's personal healing, is not forgiving themselves, but also not willing to forgive others that harmed them. So how'd that play in your journey?
Yeah. So oftentimes when we grow up in certain difficult circumstances, or whether we're living in dysfunction, whatever that dysfunction may be, we develop this fight or flight
Mhm.
personality. And so for me, it was retreat. It was the, just take flight and remove myself is what I normally would do. And what that would do is just continue to have me fester all these emotions inside, which built up this, self perceived neglect view of, I'm just never good enough. Nothing I do is ever going to be good enough. She's always going to be more concerned about those of her children she feels needs her more, which is what I heard a lot growing up. They need me more because I was the more independent and responsible one, and she didn't have to worry about me. So I built up a lot of anger around that, or a lot of resentment around feeling like, well, what do you mean? Like, I need you too. I may be strong and capable and able to do all these things, but I still need you. It took me a while to get to the place where I realized that me festering in these emotions, these negative emotions, was actually doing me more harm. And I decided to seek counsel about it because now it was starting to affect my emotions in the way I carried on in life.
Mhm.
So making the decision to really look at myself in the mirror and say, okay, what part of this is your responsibility in the emotions that you're feeling? And, I feel like growth requires humility and self-awareness. And I was able to develop that through that process enough to where I realized, like, okay, I can forgive her for not knowing, what to do, or how to respond to me, because she didn't get that growing up in her childhood either. She
Mhm.
saw from her mother the same behaviors that she was leaning on those children that needed her more. And coincidentally, my mother was the child that was just like me. um, she was the overachiever, the independent one, the responsible one. She's the matriarch of our family, the one that carried a lot of her siblings even to citizenship and bringing them into this country for a better opportunity. So it's interesting, that dynamic, and just how strong the generational habits are, what you see in development, and how that can carry on to your offspring. So for me, understanding that was easier for me to forgive first myself, for being so hard on myself over the years, and forgive her as well.
Yeah. And and not because I don't want us to sound like Debbie Downers.
Yeah,
Uh, th-
definitely.
uh, but there are so many positive uh, things that your parents and my parents, yeah, like I became a lawyer. Everybody said you're going to make a great lawyer, make a great lawyer. So I'm just like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to be a lawyer. And so I, graduated from high school, went to college, went straight to law school, got married while I was in law school. It's had kids early on in our marriage, and 4 years into practicing law, it's like I hate this. you know, I was living up to other people's expectations,
Mhm.
but the positive side of that is I I did learn the skill sets of focus and determination and goal setting. To graduate college, to graduate law school, to pass the bar exam. I learned how to do the hard work and put the time and energy into it. And those are all positive attributes. But there was also, to a certain degree, some resentment in being compelled to do that kind of stuff, to go that route.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, which is always much better than uh, foresight, is that I look back and go, well, I'm the person I am today in a positive way doing a podcast and talking to people and impacting other people's lives because of that determination and expectation my parents had, even though the delivery of it kind of sucked at times. So, and I think that's what our kids today, our younger generations at least, are wrestling with, is the delivery of the message. So they hate the messenger, but in hindsight, they're going to actually go. I find it kind of funny. My one daughter, I've actually heard her talking to my granddaughter, and I'm going, "Ooh, those are the same things I said to you when you were that age. You were listening." So of course, some of my kids are in their 40s, but it's like, oh man, a little dad proud moment there. I wasn't such an idiot after all. Yeah, so I guess a big thing is it's a journey.
Absolutely.
We never reach the finish line, kind of deal and go, oh, hey, I can retire now. All is good. So what are some things that you actually look back on now and you kind of laugh about them and see them in a different perspective than when you were going through it, and that you were probably even afraid to even talk about something, and now you're going, hey, I can tell this story and
Yes.
have a little, give us a kind of a blooper kind of look back of, hey, this was what was happening, and now I can laugh about it when I was scared to death when I was going through it.
Oh yes, I think the number one thing that pops up into my head is there was when I decided I was going to leave home, or in Miami is where my mother was living. I graduated from college. Um, and I knew that I had to just completely remove myself. I needed to go and really focus. Okay, I've got this degree. I need to take this on. And I got here to the Orlando area where I was supposed to be staying with my sister for about a week until my apartment was ready. I think a week or two, and I spoke of this in my book. And essentially, getting here, I realized I was homeless. I had nowhere to go with a child in tow. At this point, I was a single mom. My son may have been about 3 years old, and I had a plan. I've always had a plan, and so here I am, and I did not expect this. I did not expect for this plan for the floor just to, just to drop below me. And now what? I got to find some place to stay. And that was for me, especially at the time, a difficult thing because I always had a plan. I researched everything thoroughly. I made sure that everything that I did was to the T. I dotted the I's. And here I was with no place to be because my sister's situation had changed and I did not get a heads up about that.
Oh.
So yeah, so that is one of those moments that I look back on, and as difficult as it was to be in that situation, I have a different perspective now at understanding, especially with the homeless population and in our communities, and with a lot that I'm seeing families go through. I've seen families living out of their cars, and we have people reach out to us constantly for resources and in need of assistance to pay utilities because they've lost their jobs and all these things. I have a different perspective in knowing that this could literally be anyone at any given time. And there is no particular character, personality, or person that this is only going to affect. It can happen to anyone at any given moment. And it gives me a different perspective in helping the community in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That just a couple last week on the news, and I apologize, I don't remember the guy's name. 55 years old, played Philadelphia Eagles played for, I think it was the Los Angeles Rams, and had a career in the NFL. 55 years old, was found dead, living in a home, beat to death, living in a homeless camp in Los Angeles last
Mhm.
week. So when you
Mhm.
say it can happen, can happen to anybody. I call him kind of Job, uh, the,
Mhm.
the book of Job. That uh, it can all disappear in a moment's notice, uh,
Absolutely.
and and how how we respond to that is so important. It's more important how we respond than what is actually happening to us. Um,
100%.
and and that's one of the things from being around in your exposure to the law enforcement community, both professionally and personally. Um, how do you see cops today um, resolving that conflict of feeling burned out and they want to retire on duty, that nobody appreciates the sacrifices they're making, and they're just overwhelmed with all the crap that they have to see and deal with, and and you yourself too in the juvenile world, particularly when you see children being abused, and they're now in the criminal justice system because they've been arrested for committing crimes. um, what do you see as healthy ways to resolve those feelings of burnout and disappointment and anger, all those things that you're experiencing through the job?
Yeah, so I unfortunately have been I've been witness to seeing the many unhealthy ways that I notice people in the this industry, the law enforcement industry or public service industry, tend to cope. And those are usually not good ways. There's always any overuse of anything. And there definitely is a culture of alcoholism, that people tend to turn to first because that's the easiest and, it's not as bad, right? What I've found is that there is a lack of mission driven leadership in organizations and in certain agencies, whereas if there was an overall focus of the mission to include the people and understanding that we're not just people who put on uniforms and show up and do exactly what we're supposed to do. We put the hat on, I put the advocate hat on, and I may very well be completely not well on the inside. You will never see that because my job when I show up on scene is to do exactly what I'm supposed to do. I think most people carry that on, and that leads to burnout. What I am liking that I'm seeing in many organizations is that they're starting to incorporate some kind of corporate wellness type of program.
Hmm.
But what I'm also noticing is it's very hard to lean on those things when you don't feel like you can fully trust that when you work in an environment where you feel like any little bit of weakness that you show is not a good thing. You're putting on a uniform or you're putting on this face or this hat, and you're showing up at work every day with the understanding that you can take it all on. But you're also human, and you have personal issues and family issues and health issues and a number of different things that you're dealing with. And carrying on that way without having that support will certainly lead to burnout. But I am seeing more people practice certain incorporate some routines to include exercise and well-being practices and mindfulness activities on their own, and also sometimes those who are willing to give the organizations and agencies a chance to participate in the programs that they do put in place, because it does take a certain amount of vulnerability to do that. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely seeing that.
Yeah. There is the reality. There is a stigma attached to asking for help, and not just in the law enforcement community. Period. I mean, you look at teen suicides. You look at anywhere where there's self-harm or the runaways, uh, whatever it is that your response to that you talked about flight or fight or you freeze, you retire on duty, and that the stigma that's attached to that. How do we get not only in-house, you know, the the executive level of law enforcement or the politicians, but even the community? How do we get the community to not reinforce that stigma of you got to be RoboCop? You can't have any emotions while you're performing your job, and you need to be able to make split-second decisions with great accuracy based on training and experience, and all those expectations that are not realistic.
Yes.
How do we change the mindset of the community to have a sense of compassion? We're supposed to be empathetic and compassionate towards the people that we have sworn to protect and serve, but that's a two-way street. So how do we do that with the community based on your your community advocacy? How can we advocate for the community to also kind of pivot on their perceptions of what it really is to be a cop and how to treat cops?
Yeah, more community involvement. I think we have to meet the people where they are. And there's always going to be a certain level of distrust because I think that's many, 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 many years of undoing that need to be done. And in certain neighborhoods and certain areas within different cities, there's a culture and an understanding, and there will never be a level of trust that you would expect in those areas for some people. But that doesn't mean that you can't make the attempt to go out and actually reach people on a real level, do
Mm,
things that are of importance to them, show up in places where they won't expect you to be, go above and beyond the call of duty. And for instance, there are organizations who have what a certain fund that they will allow officers or civilian workers within the agency to provide a certain amount of assistance monetarily, not directly cash, but let's say I know that you are a homeless person and it's going to be freezing for us here was like 17 degrees the next day, and you have $100 that you can use and just give them a one night stay at a hotel to make it through the night.
mhm.
Little things like that, I think that show some compassion for the community and actually just showing up and being just a real person. I think that a lot of times just breaking that boundary or that barrier between you and the community where they think, oh, they're untouchable, and I have to behave a certain way when I see them, or just showing up around the block and playing basketball with a group of kids you see in the middle of the street,
Yeah,
or things like that, I think would make it a more human response to community reaction.
yeah. And I don't know if they're still active. That they used to be very active in Florida, California, and some other states. The Police Athletic League,
Yes.
And there's success stories. Uh, a Louisville police officer saw a 9-year-old kid who was, he's going down the wrong path uh, in Louisville, Kentucky, and invited him to join the Police Athletic League boxing program. 9 years old, and everybody in the world knows who he is now. That's
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
Billy Joel was a pal kid. There's just so many um, success stories out there that we in law enforcement at all ranks, we just get so caught up in it's it's never the same every day kind of deal. It's not like we're manufacturing cars and trucks and there's repetition and consistency. Every day's different. Not
Mhm.
you don't know what's going to happen, and we just get caught up in living that cycle that I don't think we take advantage of discovering the success stories and having people advocate for us.
Yeah, and I would say even, of course, the media is only going to show you the worst of the worst,
Mhm.
right? So the number of people that don't know the things that agencies are doing currently, like the police athletically, most people don't know that that even exists in certain areas. When they make themselves visible and people automatically know, oh, yes, that is something that I can tap into. My kid would really benefit from that. In fact, you were talking about boxing under the PAL program. My husband was the director of the big boxing fan, big Muhammad Ali fan, of course. Um, but he did that. And then while I was in a juvenile probation, I kept getting comments from families that saying, I feel like we don't have a mentorship program for young girls. And so I proposed that we would create one, and we did. And I was the director of the PAL program for this young group of girls here within our county. And so I think it's just a matter of having the right people speak up to what is needed in the community and leading people to those opportunities and making it known.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, and I'm reminded of the biblical principle. Whatever you're looking for, you will always find more of it. Seek and ye shall find, knock and the door shall be open, ask and you shall receive. And I think we need to get the community as well as law enforcement to have that kind of mindset of what what's the community looking for, and what are we looking for, and then how can we collaborate to achieve and we all want the same thing. Every
Mhm.
community wants safety, security, prosperity, and control. Every
Yeah,
person, I mean, that's a fundamental human mindset. Is those are the four things that it's whether it's Maslow's hierarchy, whatever you want to call it. I've just whittled it down to: we want safety, when we want security, we want prosperity, we want control in our personal lives, in our community lives. And if that's what we're all looking for, then why do we have all this animosity going on between us when yes, there are bad cops, yes, there are bad lawyers, there's bad doctors, there's bad teachers, there's bad people, parents, everywhere we go, but we don't condemn the whole medical community because there's some bad doctors.
absolutely.
How do we get the community to go? We're not going to condemn the whole profession of law enforcement because of the acts of some bad cops. So
Yeah. And
that's
I
my
think
that's my soapbox.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think the other thing that is helpful is involvement, provide some opportunity for involvement. Some people just want to be involved. They feel like their voices aren't heard. There's a whole lot of complaining that's done in many areas, whether it's a corporate job or, a
Mhm.
nonprofit organization or a business. There's a lot that people are unhappy about. So, give them some involvement in coming up with, okay, if there is a problem, let's create a mission. What is the mission? What should we be focused on if what we're doing is not working? And I think that breeds to, and I think I read this in the Seven Highly Effective Habits, or Seven Habits of Highly Effective
Yeah, good
People.
people.
Yes, and he talks about, you know that breeds commitment then from your people, from the community, from your employers, from your organization, when you involve them in the process, and it's more likely to be successful.
Yeah, if you're a good listener. Hey, have you ever seen the it was the video, the nail in the forehead video?
No.
Have you? Oh yeah. Oh, so our audience, Google nail in the forehead, and it's this video that it's a couple sitting. They're sitting on the couch, and she's got a nail stuck in her forehead, and she's complaining how she's like, oh, I have all this pressure going on in my life, and she's complaining, and he's like, you got a nail in your forehead. And she's like, it's not about the nail. You're always telling me what to do. And you never listen to me. And so as the thing goes on, she's back to talking, complaining, and he starts using the words, well, I can appreciate how you feel. I
Mm.
understand where you're coming from, and that gets that opens the opportunity to come to solutions instead of always telling people what to do, and that's hard for cops
Mhm.
because that's our life is dealing with problems and telling people, do it now or else.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and then, but then the community, they have the same mindset. I pay your salary, so you got
Mhm,
to do what I tell you to do, or you
mhm.
can't do this, and that's all this friction. When in reality, we're all looking for the same thing, but
Oh,
we're not collaborating together to reach that safety, that security, that prosperity, and that control in our personal and professional lives. So,
yeah.
uh,
And that's where mindset comes in, just shifting the culture and developing a new mindset. Because when you have internal mastery, you've mastered your feelings and your
mhm,
emotions, the way that you're thinking outside of yourself, then that precedes external leadership. Because when we're leading with that hat on, it's hard to see anything beyond just what you described, the procedures and the policies and the response and the strategy and exactly how you're supposed to behave on the job. But when you're looking at it from a different perspective, it gives you a completely different approach.
yeah, absolutely. That you just summarized Sun Tzu in the Art of War. that that you need to know the way, the weather, the terrain before strategy,
Absolutely.
as opposed to I have a solution now, let's make it work, and we have to try and change the people or that you can't. We do it in reverse, and we solve problem, we come up with solutions, and they're not to the right problem
Right.
because we didn't do what you're saying, taking that strategic critical step back and
Yeah.
not emotionally responding, but intentionally and strategically responding. Even though you can have emotions, you can be mad at your kids, but if you spank your child out of anger, that's called child abuse.
Mhm.
But you can
Mhm.
still discipline even though you're angry with them
Mhm.
because X, Y, or Z. But if you have a controlled response, then you have better outcomes and better
Mhm.
successes.
Absolutely.
Wow. So one last question.
Mhm.
What are some of the oddest responses that you've gotten from readers of your book? I mean, are there any anything like you like, oh, I didn't see that coming, kind of response to your book?
The oddest responses. I think most of the responses that I've gotten from readers on my book have all been, um, I feel the same way, or I have experienced the same thing. But I would say the closest thing I have, I was doing a book signing at Barnes and Noble, and my book is primarily geared towards mothers and daughters. But
Huh.
I had several gentlemen in the line waiting to receive and get a book signed. And when I started talking to these gentlemen, the common factor was that they had a wife or a partner or someone who had experienced this. And what they wanted was to better understand how to help them through this difficult time. So I would say that's probably the closest I've had, because I did not expect it. Sometimes when we want to solve a problem, and this is why we write a book, right? And so that was my intention, to heal the women who have experienced this, or the mothers who are struggling with this as well. But never did I envision that a man would be standing in line, waiting to receive this book and tell me just how much he thinks that it would help their wife or sister or cousin or whomever. So that would, I would say, probably be the closest to the oddest thing.
Oh, that's good because yeah, that is funny.
Yeah.
How can people reach out to you? They want to, from a consulting standpoint, or get your book. What's good?
Yes, yes. So, from a consulting standpoint, you can go to our website, greenconsultingofficial.com. That's green like the color green. And you can also find me on LinkedIn as well under Lin Green. I'm pretty active there. I share a lot of events and upcoming things. So, especially if you're in the Central Florida area, you may want to tap in there because I'm always sharing connections and business opportunities, or business networking opportunities, I should say. I have an inspirational platform that I developed during COVID for people who were really struggling mental health wise and just needed some inspiration. And it's called It's a Lifestyle. And it's spelled differently. So that's ISSALIVE style. That's It's a Lifestyle. And it's an inspirational platform that I'm most active on social media. Day-to-day inspiration I share on that. So that's where people can find me.
Great. I'll get all those in the podcast notes. Last words, last parting. If you had like, one thing I don't want to miss sharing is, what is it?
Yeah, I think overall, especially going into this year, my focus was stewardship. And I thought it was really important to kind of touch on that as we're ending here, because I think it's as we're servant leaders and warriors in this space, it's important to remember the responsibility we have with the influence we have developed. And so overall, I just want people to remember that leadership is not force. It's the influence that we have been granted to do the work that we do. And that faith fuels the courage that you need to serve others. And that mindset drives action. So I hope that servant leadership is understood as strength under control, and that in knowing that we can push forward and do our very best in all the work that we do.
Awesome, man. I might even name this episode "Faith Fuels Courage." That's
I love that.
That's what you shared. That stands out. So yeah, in fact, I'm starring that on my paperwork here. All right, and Lin, and everybody, it's Lin, Lin, not as opposed to my wife's name is Marilyn, and everybody screws it up in spelling it. So Lin Green, and on LinkedIn, and connect with her there. We're connected there as well. For our audience, man, we really appreciate you dropping in today, listening. It's because of you. We're in 32 countries on 6 continents, and we as a group, as a community of warriors, servants, and leaders are changing our immediate world and the whole world. So thank you for your support, and always remember, strive to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, because that's what warriors, servants, and leaders do every day. Love you all. See you next week.
Bye.